Welcome to Serial Napper, the bedtime podcast for people who fall asleep to true crime. This episode gets dark, so if you're sensitive to graphic content, maybe skip the nightcap. You've been warned. Hey everyone, my name is Nikki Young, and this is Serial Napper, the true crime podcast for naps. I'm back with another true crime story to lull you to sleep, or perhaps to give you nightmares. Tonight's case is going to sit heavy with you. It sat heavy with me while I was researching it. Because this one involves a child, a baby really, just 12 years old. And what happened to her, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was the end result of a system that turned its back on her. Trina Campbell was just a little girl. She should have been worrying about sleepovers, school, and what songs were playing on the radio. But instead, her life was stolen in the most violent, heartbreaking way by a man who should have never been walking free. A man that the system handed second, third, fourth chances to, while she never even got to grow up. When Trina went missing in Brampton, Ontario in early 1988, the community was horrified, but the horror turned to outrage when they found out who did it. Douglas Worth wasn't some unknown predator hiding in the shadows. He had a criminal record going back 2 decades. It started in 1968 with break-ins and stealing cars, a walking red flag. But in 1978, it got even worse. He violently sexually assaulted a young Indigenous girl in Ontario. And yes, he was convicted. He served just 8 years. But then in June of 1987, just 7 months before Trina was murdered, he was released back into the world like nothing had happened. Let me say that again. A convicted child rapist was released unsupervised, and within months, a 12-year-old little girl ended up dead. This is a story about more than one monster. It's a story about all the people and institutions who saw what he was and looked away. Trina deserved to be protected. She deserved to grow up. And instead, she was failed at every turn. So, dim the lights, put your phone down, and listen as I talk about systemic failure, child protection blind spots, and a man, Douglas Worth, who should have never been anywhere near her, let alone trusted, let alone free. So, let's jump right in. It's December 1987 in Brampton, Ontario, and Trina, she's just 12 years old. She's a young Métis girl who's had, honestly, a pretty heartbreaking life right from the start. Her home life was chaotic. Her parents struggled with raising her, whether it was due to addiction, instability, or just an inability to give her what she needed. Whatever the case, the result was that Trina spent most of her short life in foster care, and it wasn't going great there either. Trina had bounced from home to home. She ran away multiple times. Her foster parents said that they had a hard time controlling her, which, yeah, she was 12, but she was also traumatized and looking for stability. Instead, she got rules, punishment, and people giving up on her, again. Eventually, she was moved to a group home in Brampton, Ontario in November of 1987. And even though she was only there for a few weeks, that placement would end up being her last. Despite being 12, people said Trina seemed younger, like 10 or even younger than that. She was developmentally delayed, likely a direct result of all the instability and trauma that she'd had to endure. She wasn't just a kid. She was a wounded kid. On the morning of December 11th, 1987, Trina did what she always did. She caught the school bus in the morning, went to class, then got dropped off by the same bus at her group home later that day. The bus driver saw her get off the bus, And then, just like that, she vanished. At first, the staff at the group home assumed that she had run away again. It wasn't out of character. Trina had a history of taking off, often talking about wanting to reunite with her dad who lived out west. Maybe she'd gone looking for him. Maybe she'd hopped a bus. Maybe she would show up in a few days like she had before. But days passed, then weeks. There was a full-on search across Brampton. Posters were everywhere. People were canvassed. It didn't matter that she was new to the community, moved into the group home just the month before. People cared. There was a real desperate effort to bring her home. But still, nothing. By early January, the tone changed. People started to fear the worst. There were unconfirmed sightings, but none panned out. And when there was still no sign of her weeks after she vanished, her case was transferred to the homicide department. Not because they had a body, but because they needed more resources. Because they knew this wasn't just a runaway. This was likely something much darker. Now, while police and the community were frantically searching for 12-year-old Trina Campbell, there was one very crucial detail that no one knew at the time. Someone new had quietly moved into the neighborhood. His name was Douglas Worth. And once you know who he is, this whole story goes from heartbreaking to absolutely enraging. Douglas Worth was a career criminal. We're talking decades of violent behavior that started when he was barely an adult. His first known crimes were car thefts and break-and-enters. He'd steal a vehicle, take off across the country, vanish for a while, and then pop up somewhere new. Eventually, he landed in Ontario, and that's where he committed a crime so vile, so violent, it should have marked the end of his freedom forever. In 1978, he abducted a young Indigenous girl. He dragged her in the back of his truck, strangled her with a belt, and then sexually assaulted her. Read that again. He wasn't just violent. He wasn't just predatory. He was dangerous in a way that should have had every possible alarm bell ringing. He was sentenced to just 8 years behind bars for that attack. And in case you're wondering, no, prison didn't rehabilitate him. He didn't reflect. He didn't feel remorse. He got worse. While incarcerated, he became more aggressive, more unstable. He picked fights with other inmates. He assaulted correctional officers. He was the guy throwing urine and feces at people. And then there's this. In his prison cell, guards found a newspaper clipping about the Yorkshire Ripper. You know, this serial killer who murdered 13 women in the UK. Douglas had kept the article and written across it that this would be his greatest fantasy come true. He wasn't subtle. He broadcasted his intentions. He wanted revenge on society. He said it over and over again. He told inmates and staff that when he got out, he was going to commit more violent crimes, specifically saying that he wanted to attack children on a school playground with an axe. So when it came time for early parole, of course, he got denied multiple times. But here's the horrifying part. When he served his full sentence, they had no choice but to release him because he wasn't on parole. There were no conditions, no supervision, no curfews, no check-ins. The system had zero power over him. People tried to stop it. Just months before his release, there was a last-ditch effort to have him declared criminally insane. He underwent a 30-day psychiatric assessment. The result? He was officially diagnosed as a psychopath. But under the law, being a psychopath is just not enough to keep him detained. He didn't qualify for involuntary commitment, so they opened the gates and they let him walk out. Now, in June of 1987, Douglas was a free man. He moved to Edmonton, Alberta, and local police were notified that he was in the area. There wasn't really anything that they could do about it other than keep an eye out. While there, he reconnected with a woman named Mary Kelly. She had a young teen son named Sean from a previous relationship. Mary had originally met Douglas while visiting another inmate in prison, and they began a romantic relationship while he was still behind bars. Because apparently charm and homicidal rage can coexist if you're that manipulative. After his release, Douglas moved in with Mary and her son, Sean. And surprise, the abuse started almost immediately. He beat Mary, he beat Sean, he held them captive in their own home, controlling every aspect of their lives. This man wasn't reformed. He was escalating. Eventually, Douglas made his way back to Ontario, and that's where things went from dangerous to deadly. The police, well, they lost track of him. He slipped through the cracks. Or maybe it's more accurate to say that the cracks were big enough to fit a man like Douglas Worth through without anyone noticing. And within months of his return, 12-year-old Trina Campbell was dead. By early 1988, 2 months had passed since Trina Campbell was last seen stepping off that school bus in Brampton. No real leads, no body, just a growing pit in the stomachs of everyone worried about the whereabouts of a child, and a community full of missing posters and unanswered questions. Police still had her classified as a missing person, but at this point, everyone was thinking it. Something terrible had happened. And yet, just blocks away from where Trina vanished, Douglas Worth was quietly living in a downtown Brampton rooming house, blending in with the rest of the city's noise. No parole officers to check in on him, no tracking, just a known predator living around the corner from the last place a child was seen. Then, like something out of a twisted soap opera, his old girlfriend, Mary Kelly, and her son, Sean, they re-entered the picture. They had been abused, terrorized, and held hostage by this man back in Edmonton, but somehow they decided to follow him to Ontario. Maybe out of love, maybe out of fear, maybe a bit of both. Either way, they moved into his rooming house in Brampton and became a family unit again, from the outside at least. But things with Douglas were getting weirder, more paranoid. He was starting to spiral. In March of 1988, he told Mary that he had been involved in some kind of crime. Very vague, very cryptic, classic manipulator stuff. He wouldn't say what he did, only that the police were probably watching him and he was certain that they were going to crack down on him soon. He did not want to go back to prison. He'd made that very clear. So he asked Mary to help him destroy some evidence that he had stashed away a few months earlier. Evidence of what? Well, he wouldn't say, but he did mention guns, illegal ones apparently, that he needed to get rid of. And Mary, likely terrified and trauma-bonded at this point, she agreed. So they rented a car, Mary got behind the wheel, and drove Douglas to an area near downtown Brampton. He left the car carrying a hockey bag, just casually heading into a wooded ravine area. Red flag? I mean, girl, this is a whole red banner, but Mary kept quiet. When he came back out of the ravine, he had something in the hockey bag this time. And that's when things got even darker. Mary noticed a dark liquid leaking from the bottom of the bag. She asked him what it was because, obviously, and he told her not to worry. It was just transmission fluid. Sure, Doug, because when you drag a mysterious heavy bag out of a ravine that's leaking God knows what, the most logical explanation is car maintenance. Mary didn't press it, though. She didn't ask any more questions because, again, she was scared. This man had beaten her, held her hostage, and made her complicit in whatever nightmare he was dragging her into. So they drove around looking for a secluded area for him to dump this bag. Eventually, they ended up about an hour north of the city, deep in rural Ontario. Douglas got out of the car with the hockey bag, walked into the woods, and when he came back, the bag was gone. Whatever, or whoever was inside it, had just been hidden away in the middle of nowhere. And Mary still said nothing. After their little errand in the woods, where Douglas Worth stashed that ominously leaking hockey bag, Mary and Douglas returned to the rooming house in Brampton like nothing had happened. But there was one thing that needed taking care of. the rental car. The next morning, Douglas turned to Mary's teenage son, Sean, and told him, "Go clean out the trunk." That's right. He handed off this chore like it was trash day, only instead of emptying out coffee cups and receipts, there was a stain, a dark, sticky stain in the trunk. Sean said that it looked like blood. It smelled like blood. But like everyone else in Douglas Worth's orbit, Sean stayed silent, at least for the moment. Mary returned the car to the rental place, no questions asked. No one raised any eyebrows. It was just another errand checked off the list. Not long after, the whole trio, Douglas, Mary, and Sean, they packed up and they left Brampton behind. They headed east to Nova Scotia, where Douglas was originally from. You'd think someone on the run from his own conscience might try to stay low, and that's exactly what they tried to do, to keep quiet, to keep to themselves. No drama, no attention. But here's the thing about psychopaths. They just can't help themselves. When Douglas's family found out that he was back in town, some of them immediately called the police. Not because they were happy to see Douglas and they wanted a warm family reunion, but because they were terrified. They knew what he was capable of and they didn't want any part of it. And honestly, they had every reason to be scared. Because despite all of his efforts to fly under the radar, Douglas just couldn't keep his mouth shut. He started talking, bragging really. He told his sister and her husband that he had committed a murder back in Brampton. Only, not the one he had actually committed. In this twisted game of telephone, Douglas claimed he'd killed a man, that he'd broken the guy's leg, and then he beat him to death after an argument. Total fabrication? Maybe. Total distraction from the real horror? Definitely. But whatever the motive, it freaked his family out enough that they decided to do what everyone else had been doing for decades. Stay silent to stay safe. Because when someone like Douglas Worth looks you in the eye and tells you that they've killed before, you believe them. You just don't always know who. By April of 1988, 4 months had passed since 12-year-old Trina Campbell vanished from Brampton. The case, it seemed to be going cold. The community was losing hope. And Douglas Worth, he was all the way out in Nova Scotia, playing house and pretending that he didn't have a corpse on his conscience. But it turns out you can only keep a lid on something like this for so long, especially when kids are involved. On April 21st, Sean, the teenage son of Douglas's girlfriend, Mary Kelly, went to school like it was any other day. But something in him that day snapped. Maybe it was fear, maybe guilt, maybe he'd just had enough. He sat down with a guidance counselor, and what he said next set everything into motion. Sean started making shocking allegations about his stepfather, Douglas. The counselor didn't hesitate. She brought the police into the room, and thank God she did, because Sean was terrified. He told them that Douglas had been violently abusing him for months. He was visibly shaken. He had bruises on his face and body to back up what he was saying. This wasn't a kid acting out. This was a kid who thought that his stepfather might kill him and his mother next. And then he dropped a bomb. Sean started talking about conversations that he had overheard. Conversations where Douglas admitted to killing someone. He didn't know who, he didn't know when, but he knew that Doug was dangerous and he knew that he was hiding something. Then Sean told the police about something very specific, something physical. He talked about the day that Doug had asked him to clean the trunk of that rental car. That sticky, dark stain. The smell. The way Douglas dismissed it as transmission fluid. Sean didn't buy it then, and he sure as hell wasn't buying it now. It looked like blood. With Douglas's criminal history in hand and Sean's testimony on the record, the police moved fast. They tracked down the rental car in Brampton. It had been rented in Mary Kelly's name and returned months earlier. Amazingly, the trunk hadn't been thoroughly cleaned. That same stain, it was still there, dark, dried, and still sending a message. The police towed the car straight to the lab. What they found would change everything. Fibers from the trunk were tested and confirmed to be soaked in human blood. But not just any blood, decomposed human blood. That meant that whoever bled in that trunk was already dead. The blood was also a rare type, not common amongst the general population, but more commonly found in Indigenous communities. That got police thinking. They didn't have any open homicide cases involving an Indigenous man in Brampton, because remember, Douglas had been telling people that he killed a man. But they did have a missing child, Trina Campbell, Métis, missing since December. No body, no signs of life. But suddenly, everything started to connect. And when they looked at Douglas Worth's history, the pattern was impossible to ignore. He had a record of sexual and physical violence against young women. His previous victim was also Indigenous. He had a known hatred for society, for women, for anyone vulnerable, and Trina Campbell, she checked every box. They didn't have a body, but they did have a name, and they were finally getting closer to the truth. By April of 1988, police in Brampton had more than a hunch about Douglas Worth. They had Sean's testimony, a rental car full of decomposed blood, and a violent criminal history that practically screamed danger to children. But there was one major problem. They still had not found Trina. No body, no murder charge. So investigators packed their bags and headed to Nova Scotia. Quietly, because they weren't ready to move in just yet. They needed to see what he was up to. They placed Douglas under surveillance, keeping him in their sights without tipping their hand. And thank God that they did, because it did not take long before they caught him following several young Indigenous girls all around town. Just watching them, stalking them, waiting for a moment. It was terrifying, but it still wasn't enough. They couldn't arrest him for something that they suspected. They needed hard evidence. And that meant one thing. They had to find Trina's body. Then came the break. On May 6, 1988, nearly 5 months after Trina had disappeared, Douglas's sister and brother-in-law finally walked into a police station. They had had enough. The fear had turned into something else. Maybe guilt, maybe conscience, maybe survival instinct. They told investigators about the story that Douglas had shared with them, the murder of that man in Brampton. He said that he'd broken the guy's leg, beat him to death, and dumped the body. But now, he was starting to panic. He was worried that the body would be found. Worse, he was worried that the body would be identified. And his bright idea? He wanted to go back to Brampton to dig up the remains and remove the head. Yeah, that was his plan. Cut off the head so that they couldn't ID the victim. Which is not how forensic science works, but no one's accusing Doug of being a criminal mastermind here. So the police, knowing that he was desperate and sloppy, they hatched a trap. They told Douglas's sister and brother-in-law to play along, to offer him a car, give him some cash, whatever he needed to make the trip back to Brampton and deal with the body. And then they would follow him, let him lead them right to it. At first, his sister was hesitant. She didn't really want to get involved, didn't want to be found out. And honestly, that's fair. She was terrified of him, like everyone else. But the police told her something that she didn't know. They didn't believe that Douglas had killed a man. They believed he had killed a child, a little girl. And suddenly, something shifted. She was a mother herself, and she realized that Douglas, this monster, had even babysat her daughters. Her daughters. Let that sink in. A man who bragged about murder, who fantasized about attacking children with an axe, who literally wrote his own serial killer fan fiction in prison. He was babysitting her kids. And that's when she agreed, and the trap was set. And Doug Worth? He had no idea that he was about to lead investigators straight to the truth. So, here we are. It's May 1988, and the police are ready to roll the dice. They've given Douglas's sister and brother-in-law $300 and a rental car to pass off to him. The hope that he'd do exactly what he had threatened to do, to return to the scene of the crime to destroy the evidence. And wouldn't you know it, he took the bait. That very night, Doug and Mary Kelly loaded up the rental and they hit the road, heading straight for Ontario. It was a 20-plus hour drive back to Brampton, and they weren't alone. Unmarked police vehicles were following them the entire way. It was a slow, tense crawl across provinces, the kind of drive where everyone in law enforcement is holding their breath, just praying that this guy leads them to Trina. Finally, after a day on the road, they make it to Brampton, and Doug wastes no time. He and Mary head north of the city towards that wooded area, the one where months earlier, Douglas had disappeared into the trees with a hockey bag and came back with something dripping. Now, it's dark outside, pitch black, early morning hours, the kind of dark that just swallows you whole, and even Doug seems to be disoriented. Like he's not quite sure where he buried what he's looking for. Douglas and Mary Kelly pull over to the side of the road and they decide to take a rest for a bit. Meanwhile, officers are scrambling to find a discreet place to watch without being obvious. It's a delicate dance. Too close and they spook him. Too far and they lose him. Unfortunately, in this case, they lose him. When Doug and Mary wake up and hit the road again, they somehow manage to slip the tail. Just like that, they vanish. After more than 48 hours of surveillance, after crossing multiple provinces, they're gone. Panic mode activated. Police fan out and they start searching the area. This was their one shot. If he dumped the evidence or found a way to vanish again, this entire operation would be blown. But then, 20 minutes later, jackpot. They find the rental. It's parked near the tree line just off the road. The car is empty. Then, out of the woods, like a horror movie, Douglas and Mary emerge, casually strolling back to the vehicle. And Douglas, he's carrying something, a dark gym bag. And if your stomach just flipped, well, same. Police don't move in right away. They don't want to give him the opportunity to make up a story like, oh, I just found this and I was going to hand it in. No, they're smarter than that. They follow the car as it begins driving south. Douglas is behind the wheel. Mary is beside him, probably thinking the whole time that they had gotten away with it again. But as the kilometers tick by, it becomes clear he's heading home back to Nova Scotia. And the police, they aren't about to let that happen. They pull the car over, lights and sirens on, and finally they arrest Douglas Worth. They don't yet know what's in that bag, but they know that they've got the man who led them right to it. Douglas Worth and Mary Kelly were both placed under arrest on the spot. Even before they went and opened the car door, it was immediately obvious that there was a dead body inside that vehicle. The smell was unmistakable. Now, in the back seat, on the floor, officers found that dark gym bag that Douglas had been carrying. Inside the gym bag were several layers of garbage bags, one stuffed inside the other, like he thought wrapping horror in a plastic would somehow keep the truth from leaking out, literally and figuratively. Inside those bags were human remains, and in one of them, a skull, small, delicate, the skull of a child. It didn't take long to confirm what everyone already suspected. It was Trina Campbell. The rest of her remains were later recovered from that wooded area north of the city, right where Douglas had taken Mary Kelly to get rid of evidence just a few months earlier. She had been left there in pieces, her body broken and butchered. Despite being largely skeletal by the time that they found her, the damage was obvious. Investigators could see that her leg had been broken, her skull was fractured, her forearms had been snapped off. It was a brutal, violent, unthinkable scene. This wasn't just a murder. This was rage. This was cruelty. This was someone trying to erase her. He broke her. He beat her. He butchered her. And then he threw her away like she was nothing. But she was everything, and now finally, Trina had been found. And the man responsible, the monster, was in custody. After the discovery of Trina Campbell's remains, Douglas Worth was officially charged with her murder. And if you're hoping for a shred of remorse or guilt, don't hold your breath. During his police interviews, Douglas was cold, arrogant, indignant, not sorry, not scared. If anything, he was pissed, furious that the police had interrupted whatever twisted fantasy he had left unfinished. He didn't want to cooperate, he didn't ask for a lawyer, and he certainly did not ask for forgiveness. What he did say was horrifying. He told the police that he had grabbed Trina at a supermarket, sexually assaulted her and beat her, and then left her to die alone in a ravine. And let's just take a moment here. This man was released from prison less than 6 months earlier for the violent sexual assault of another young girl. He got out, and within half a year, a 12-year-old little girl was dead. Now, Mary Kelly, who had been there for the months of paranoia and blood-stained gym bags, she became a key witness for the prosecution. After careful review, police determined that she was more of a victim than an accomplice. Abused, controlled, terrified. So they made the decision not to charge her. She testified against him, and she wasn't the only one. Now, at trial, Douglas tried to pull a last-minute trick. He pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. His lawyer, Damian Frost, went full desperation mode. He asked the jury to consider an insanity plea, claiming that Douglas had been hallucinating during the murder, that in his mind, Trina wasn't a 12-year-old girl, she was a female prison guard from his past. That's the level of delusion and deflection that we're working with here. But the jury didn't buy it at all. It took them less than an hour to come back with a verdict. And they weren't playing around. Douglas Worth was found guilty of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 23 years. And when that verdict was read out in court, Douglas Worth lost it. He screamed, "I'm not an animal." But let's be real, his actions say otherwise. This was a man who had been released despite repeated warnings that he was high risk, that he would reoffend, that he had fantasies about hurting children. And 6 months after getting out, he murdered Trina Campbell. The system knew, and it still let him walk free. Trina Campbell was 12 years old when she was murdered. Her life was violently stolen by a man that the system knew was dangerous and still let out. So you'd think, after all of that, we'd do everything in our power to make sure someone like Douglas Worth never saw freedom again. And for a while, it looked like we might have learned something. In 1997, the Canadian Criminal Code was amended to help keep dangerous offenders, especially those at high risk of reoffending, behind bars. It was a response to cases just like this one, a way to say, we see the cracks and we're going to fix them. But guess what? It didn't work. Because in July of 2025, just a few weeks ago, Douglas Worth was granted parole. He's out. Yes, that Douglas Worth. The man who raped a child, murdered another, fantasized about killing kids with an axe, bragged about violence, was declared a psychopath, the one who literally butchered Trina Campbell. He is walking free. According to Halifax Regional Police, 73-year-old high-risk offender Douglas Worth is now living in Dartmouth, a community in the Halifax area. You know, right back where he once stalked young Indigenous girls. Now, police did issue a public notice to warn the community that he's there, because of course they did. He's dangerous and everyone knows it. But here's the kicker. They're still letting him live among the public. The Parole Board of Canada hasn't released their full reasoning yet, but media outlets like the National Post are digging, trying to get answers. Here's what we do know. He can't have contact with children or his victims. He can't use drugs or alcohol. He must report any and all relationships that he enters into. Sounds strict, sure, but we've seen how well those conditions hold up. And in the police advisory, they included this charming little disclaimer. This is not intended to encourage any form of vigilante activity or other unreasonable conduct. Right, because finding out a literal predator is living next door should inspire nothing but calm and composure, right? Here's the hard truth. Trina never got a second chance. She never got to grow up, never got to heal from the trauma that marked her entire childhood, never got justice that lasted. But he did, and now he's out again. How many more warnings do we need? And that's the devastating story of Trina Campbell, a 12-year-old girl who never stood a chance, not because she wasn't brave or strong or worthy of love, but because every adult and every system that was supposed to protect her didn't. She was let down by Child Protective Services, by the justice system, by the parole board, by all of the red flags that were politely ignored until it was too late. Douglas Worth should never have been freed. He never should have been anywhere near that child. And yet, here we are, in 2025, watching history repeat itself in real time. If this case makes you angry, good, let it. Because we should be angry. We should be loud. We should be screaming Trina's name every time a high-risk offender gets released with a slap on the wrist and a list of conditions that no one can really enforce. She deserved better. She deserved protection. She deserved to grow up. And she deserved justice that actually meant something. That's it for me tonight. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Serial Napper. You guys know where to find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Threads, TikTok, pretty much everywhere. If you'd like to support my show and get bonus content, head on over to my Patreon. It's linked in the show notes. Until next time, lock your doors, check on your strong friends, and if the parole board lets a violent offender move in next door, maybe raise a little hell about it. Bye.